Malia. Malia is a young girl growing up in a small village in the Himalayan mountains with her mom and her younger brothers. Malia was born into severe poverty, and her mom often struggles to even get food on the table for her family. One day, a man enters the town, sees 10-year-old Malia out working in the yard, and approaches her mom. He sympathizes with her. He says, "Hey, I know it must be really difficult being single and on your own, trying to provide for your family. Let me help you out. I have a job opportunity for your daughter down in the city of Kathmandu. She can work as a housekeeper. She can live with girls her age. She can go maybe just for a year, sending money back every single week for your family to help you provide." Malia's mom was really reluctant at first. She didn't know this man. She didn't know if he would keep her daughter safe, but she also realized that she was running out of options. She didn't know even how she was going to put food on the table for tomorrow, so reluctantly, she sent Malia with the man. What Malia's mom couldn't have known is that Malia would then be trafficked through the city of Kathmandu for sex for 7 years. Meet Sarah. Sarah is a young high school girl living in the state of Ohio. Her parents were recently divorced, so she moved with her mom to a new town where she got a job at the local mall. It was there when Sarah was working that she met a boy. He worked just a few stores down, who took a real interest in getting to know Sarah. Sarah, lonely in this new town, really appreciated the fact that he asked about her life and her interests, and she really enjoyed getting to know him. One day after work, he asked Sarah if she would be interested in going to dinner, so she went along with him after work to dinner. He drove her to the parking lot of a warehouse where an older man that he was working for was waiting. At that moment, Sarah was captured and sold into the state of Ohio's largest sex trafficking ring. Meet Diana. Diana is actually a high school student living right here in Sioux City. Dating a boy a few years older than she is, he has introduced her to a life that is far beyond her years. He's deep into the world of selling and doing drugs, and when his debts begin to become too much for him, he realizes that he has something fairly valuable in his possession: Diana. So he begins to sell her for whatever it is that he needs to pay off his debts, for the next fix, and Diana, really feeling like this is love, scared of what might happen to her relationship with him if she says no, agrees, trusting that it will only be temporary. 3 girls, 3 real names of people that represent what sex trafficking looks like in our country, in our city, and in our world today. Now, I know that that sounds a little bit like the introduction to a creepy episode of Dateline. But the reality is, this is what sex trafficking looks like in our world today. And this morning, as a church, we are going to tackle this issue, and it is a monster of a social justice issue. So thank you, Dad, for choosing this week to go on vacation. But I want to take a look at what we need and what we are called to do as a church. What I love about this social justice series that we have been doing is the opportunity it gives us to really hold a mirror up to ourselves as a church, to force ourselves to answer the question, how are we actually doing at getting beyond our 4 walls? How are we actually doing at representing Jesus in our world today? Now, I want to recognize a few things before we get started. First and foremost, I am no expert. I know that there are people sitting in this room right now that have done far more in the world of human trafficking than I have, that know far more than I will ever know. There is no way we're going to be able to cover all of the intricacies and all of the complexities of this world together this morning. I am simply someone who deeply loves Jesus and wants to see our church take ground on his behalf. And secondly, that this message comes from that exact agenda. No political agenda, no guilt agenda, no raising money agenda. Just an agenda and a deep desire to see our church move in the world around us. To see our church be a church that truly reflects the heart of Jesus. Now, if you're familiar with Jesus at all, if you've read of him in the New Testament and what he was about here on earth, you would know that no one had a heart for social justice like Jesus did. No one cared more for those who felt they were worthless. No one gave worth to those who felt they were worthless more than Jesus. No one looked for those that were cast aside in society more than Jesus did. And we see it not even only in the way that Jesus lived his life and the way that he interacted with the people around him, we even see it in the words that he spoke. In the book of Luke, there's this moment where Jesus actually quotes a prophecy that was made about him in the book of Isaiah. And it's this simple sentence where Jesus basically says, hey, if you can't tell by my actions, if you can't tell by what I'm doing here on earth, let me lay out for you exactly why I'm here. And it's found in Luke 4. He says this, he, speaking of God, has sent me, speaking of Jesus, to proclaim that captives will be released, that the blind will see, that the oppressed will be set free, and that the time of the Lord's favor has come. He says, I'm here to make sure that anyone being held captive is going to be released, that the oppressed are going to be set free. So as we look at the issue of sex trafficking, as we look at one of the most oppressive things that exist in our world today, as we face a world that has more captives than ever before, we have to ask ourselves the question, what are we going to do about it? What are we as the house of God? What are we as a church that wants to chase after the heart that Jesus had? As we face more oppressed people than ever before, what in the world are we going to do about it? Because we have to do something. Now, in a moment, we're going to get into numbers and statistics and stories. And I know that the enormity of it all is going to be incredibly overwhelming. That we can sit here this morning and have really sincere hearts, longing to make a difference and a change, but we're going to become paralyzed by the enormity of it all. And so since we can't do everything, we end up doing nothing, instead of doing something that could activate one thing to change. So as we sit together this morning, I want to ask you to filter everything through this question. What is one thing I can do? As you sit in your seat this morning, constantly be asking yourself, in the face of all of this happening in our world around us, I know I can't do everything, but what is one thing that I can do? What is one way that I can be like Jesus in this situation? Now, I know we probably sit here together in this room kind of all over the map. Some of you super familiar with the issue of human trafficking and sex trafficking in our world today, and others of you are maybe more like me when I started researching this message. You're aware that it's an issue, you've maybe heard about it in the news, but you don't really know a whole lot. So I want to start together today with just looking at the staggering reality of where we are. I want to take a look at the numbers, because first and foremost, we just need to hear it. We just need to hear the truth of where we're at as a world today. So here's where we're at. Right now, they estimate that there are 40.3 million people around the world being trafficked. Now, this includes all forms of trafficking, so labor trafficking, sex trafficking, forced marriages. But then they would estimate that approximately 4.5 million of those people are being trafficked for sex. In the United States of America, they would estimate that there's 105,000 people being trafficked for sex. Now, if you go to any website, typically their numbers are a little bit different, and almost all of them have a little asterisk next to the number, where they would say these are estimates, where the reality of where we're at right now, because we can't know everything, it's so underground, actually it's probably 3 to 5 times this number. We just can't possibly know. If you look at the industry of sex trafficking, it brings in $99 billion a year. The average girl will make her trafficker $100,000 in her lifetime. The numbers are staggering. These are numbers that you look at and you can't possibly ignore the fact that we have a problem in our world today. But the problem with these numbers is that we unintentionally dehumanize the people that they represent. When we see 40 million, when we see 4.5 million, we forget that that is 4.5 million faces. 4.5 million identities, 4.5 precious souls that Jesus died for. And so as the church, we cannot possibly just hear these numbers. We are called to see it differently than maybe the world sees it, to see it in the way that Jesus would see it. We need to see that every single one of these humans has worth. We need to see the worth in every human life that is represented in those numbers. It's so interesting in Scripture, in the very first book of the Bible, the very first chapter of the first book of the Bible, God tells us just how much value he puts in the life of a human, in the fact that we are the only thing that God chose to make in his own image. Not trees, not squirrels, not donkeys, well, maybe some of you. He only made human beings in his own image. In Genesis 1:27, it tells us this: so God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. I love that it tells us twice. Like, it's almost like, hey, listen up. I want you to know just how valuable you are to me, that I'm actually making you in my own image, that within all of you, I am going to put my thumbprint. I am going to give you worth. I am going to give you value and dignity and purpose. I love you so much that I am going to put my very own thumbprint on exactly who you are. We see the worth that God puts on a human soul in the rescue mission of Jesus. I mean, he decides that human souls are worth so much that he is going to send his son Jesus to die in order to save as many of them as he possibly can. We see the worth of a human not only in the death of Jesus, but we see it in the life of Jesus as well, as he chose to live a life that saw people that society had cast aside. We see it in the way that Jesus interacts with almost every person in the Bible, constantly drawing people forth that felt like they were worthless and showing them and reminding them of the worth that they had in him. We see this beautifully in the life of Mary Magdalene. You're probably really familiar with the story of Mary Magdalene, about the role that she played in the ministry of Jesus. But you're maybe not super familiar with the life that she lived before she met Jesus. In fact, Jesus gave her so much worth that we often aren't even aware of who she was before she met Jesus. Here's who she was before she met Jesus. It says, among them, speaking of the women that were traveling with Jesus, it says, among them were Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. I love that it's like a little byline behind Mary, as if it's not even really that important. But the reality is that when Jesus first met Mary Magdalene, she was actually possessed by 7 demons. What a sight she must have been when she first encountered Jesus. Disheveled hair, sunken in eyes, glaring at the people around her. She probably had been forced aside by society, forced to live in almost a dungeon-like place, because she was deemed not valuable, not worth anything by the human beings around her. But when Jesus saw her, he saw within her a worth and a value and a purpose. And then he showed her that worth and that value and that purpose. She played an integral part in the ministry of Jesus when he was here on this earth. She actually stood next to Jesus' mother while he hung on the cross, and then, as if to put an exclamation point on the fact that she was worth something, Jesus actually chose her to be the first person that he appeared to when he rose from the dead. We see it in the book of Mark. It says, after Jesus rose from the dead, the first person who saw him was Mary Magdalene. The first person that Jesus chose to sound the alarms that he had risen from the dead was a woman who was overcome at one point with demons, a woman who society had decided was worthless, a woman that Jesus looked in the eyes of and said, you have worth, you have value. Let me show you what you can accomplish in this world with me. And Jesus knows the worth of every single one of the 4.5 million faces. Jesus knows their name. He knows their story. He knows the value that has been imprinted in every single one of them. And I can promise you that nothing breaks the heart of Jesus more than to watch society forget about them. Nothing breaks the heart of Jesus more than when his own church, his bride, doesn't act on behalf of the people that have been deemed worthless, who view themselves as worthless. Jesus says, take a look at how I lived. Take a look at how I chose people that had decided they were worth nothing and show them what they were worth in the eyes of a God that loved them. Church, we have to be a heart that reflects Jesus in that. The heartbeat of our church has to be a people that wants to get outside of our four walls and seek out people that society has devalued, that even other human beings have devalued. We have to be a church that cares about what's going on in the world around us. The reality is there are more people enslaved in the world today than there have been ever in history before. Church, that has to break our hearts. We have to do something about that. We have to give value to the people who feel like they have no value. So then what can we do? I mean, I would think that all of us would sit here and agree that this is something that we need to stop. This is something that we don't want to watch happen on our watch as the church. So what exactly can we do? The enormity of it all is so complex. It's not always as cookie cutter as the stories I told you on this stage. It's manipulation and extortion and taking advantage of young boys and young girls that have no idea about the life that they are about to walk into. So what can we do? Before I give you some really practical things that we can do together this morning, I want to show you the story of someone who actually did do something for this cause. Her name is Abby Edgar, and she actually traveled over to Germany to work with women that were stuck in sex trafficking. In Germany, it's really complex because prostitution is actually legalized there. And so you're working with women who want out but really see no way of getting out. Abby decided that her heart was going to break for what broke the heart of Jesus, and she was going to do something on behalf of the people who had no voice. Go ahead and check out Abby's story.
So what I did overseas, I went to Germany. It was one of the only opportunities I found at the time to go overseas. And what struck me unique about Germany is that prostitution is legal. And also what was unique about Germany is that there's a lot of girls that are trafficked into the country who are from Eastern Europe. And because of the Eastern European connection, that's where I grew up. I just knew that this was an opportunity totally from God to go over there and interact with the women there and just see what legalized prostitution does to a culture as well as the impact it has on women in a globalized scale. I spent a majority of my time on working with two different German nonprofits. So one was primarily street outreach, and it was kind of a cafe style, so not actually a coffee shop, but more like a safe place for women to come in who are literally working the streets, like right outside the door. And the entire block is legalized is street prostitution. So I spent most of my time doing street outreach. So we just would make warm food, we'd have sandwiches for the girls, and we'd also have clothes available to them at the last half hour of the shift where they can come in and pick out stuff. And then a lot of the time was just sitting there and just waiting and building that trust for the women, because what they needed to see was that you were going to be there consistently. And that represented, okay, she's committed here, I can trust her. And then the other nonprofit that I worked with was an aftercare program. And so that is when girls have officially escaped, whether it be a prostitution ring or sex trafficking, whatever the case may be. And that was more of like, let's focus on helping them integrate back into society. My typical girl that I interacted with was most often from Bulgaria or Romania, ages 30 to 50, and most often addicted to drugs. So crystal meth was primarily the big hit. And a lot of them have been on the streets for a few years. Some of them were initially with a pimp, so someone who trafficked them, and then eventually, because of drugs, they were just on their own. And so a lot of them were homeless. But then the evening shift is actually where it gets different. So these are my ladies during the day, and then the evening is where I worked with primarily girls who were caught up in a ring, and those girls were younger, so ranging from 14 to 20. What's unique about Germany is that it's a destination place. So most of the girls have already been broken so much before they got to the streets of Germany, where they don't feel like they have an identity, they don't feel like they have a personhood, where they don't feel like a woman, that the only person they can rely on is the person that is trafficking them, or is there just insane necessity to provide for their kids, because that's another thing. Most of these girls had 3 or more kids, and they're stuck on the streets. And even though you can't see any of these change, there's just so much brokenness that what they saw and what they felt is just like so many pieces of themselves scattered across the streets that they didn't think that they could be fixed or put back together. Jesus knows every single person's name, and he has it written on their hand. And what he offers to these girls is a new hope and a restoration and a wholeness that only can come from him. But above all, he sees beyond their pain and beyond their shame, and he sees the masterpiece that he created them to be. A common misconception about sex trafficking is, 1, it's across an ocean. 2, you can't really do anything practically or tangibly to help anybody unless you hop on a plane and go over there. And 3, it'll never affect you. If Jesus were talking to the church right now, which he does, he would say to open our eyes. He would say, rise up and stop sticking around in your comfortable bubble and just take a stand. One quote that really sticks out in my head is the one from Dietrich Bonhoeffer during the Holocaust. He said, where is the church? And we are the church. Jesus has given us the opportunity and the skills uniquely necessary to reach people who feel unseen, unheard, and without a voice. And all we have to do is just say yes.
So what can we do? I mean, obviously, we're not all going to move to Germany. So what can we do right here and right now to fight the trafficking that's happening in our own backyards? I want to give you just 3 things that you can do today. First and foremost, I would say you can pray. And I don't mean this in the churchy, flippant, I'll be praying for you kind of way. I mean, you can become a prayer warrior for this cause. You can fight for the women, the children, the boys, and the girls that have found themselves in the world of sex trafficking. You can pray that they would be freed. You can pray that they would have a heart that sees a Jesus that loves them. You can pray for the organizations that are on the front lines fighting this every single day. You can pray for their leaders who are probably tired and weary of a world that seems to just keep getting worse. The second thing that you can do is you can just become aware. Maybe this morning was the first time that you really heard exactly what was happening in the world of human trafficking and sex trafficking. We've set up a little page on our website for you to visit all sorts of organizations that are on the front lines. If you just scroll down, you'll see the little not for sale graphic. If you click there, it will take you to different organizations. There's actually one listed there that's a local organization called Lila Mae's House. They're working with women that are victims of sex trafficking right here in Sioux City. You can learn about the intricacies of this world and how it exists. Because the reality is that we can't do anything if we're just aware of it, but we can't do anything until we are. We cannot be activated to change anything until we're aware of what's happening in the world around us. And then the third thing that you can do And this is going to feel completely out of left field, but every advocate in the fight against sex trafficking would tell you this: you can stop watching porn. They would say that the business of pornography is feeding this monster in a way that we will never understand. Advocates in the fight against sex trafficking would go as far to say if we could eliminate porn tonight, we would eliminate sex trafficking tomorrow. If you want to help in this fight, and this is something that you're struggling with, seek out a way to get free from underneath it. In my research for this message, I stumbled across the story of a young girl named Anna. She was from Istanbul, Turkey, and she was born into abject poverty. Anna, like most girls in her situation, was promised the hopes of a job. She was actually going to work as a hairdresser, and she was sent over in a shipping container with 60 other girls. Anna never could have known that she was actually being sold into a brothel in Greece. She spent years of her life there before she was rescued by an amazing organization called A21. And her rescuer retells this story where she was sitting down with Anna, and Anna was having almost this post-traumatic stress episode. And in that moment, Anna looked at her rescuer and she asked her this question: "Why are you here?" Her rescuer, seeing this as the perfect opportunity to share the gospel with Anna, launched into the story of a God that loved her, a God that had a plan for her, a God that saw value within her. And as she's in the middle of this speech to Anna, Anna interrupts her and says, "Stop, stop, stop. If what you're saying is true, if what you're saying is true, that there's a God that loves me, that there's a God that has a plan for me, then why weren't you here sooner?" Church, we have to be there sooner. We have to ask ourselves the honest question of why we aren't taking more ground in this area. We have to ask ourselves the question why we are letting this happen on our watch. It cannot be our legacy as a church that during our tenure we allowed human trafficking to flourish more than ever before. Imagine standing before God and having to acknowledge that fact. That on our watch, we allowed the very thing that He created in His own image to be sold and trafficked than anything else. Jesus made His mission on this earth incredibly clear. He said to us, "I am coming to proclaim that captives will be released, that the blind will see, that the oppressed will actually be set free." We need to link arms with Jesus. We need to carry that same heart. We need to stop deciding that it's easier to just kind of live in our safe little bubble and not face the reality of what's happening in the world around us today. Our goal this morning was not to make you feel depressed about where the world is right now. That is the last thing that we need right now. But just to face the reality together. To stop being distracted by the noise around us, the things that aren't so important to Jesus, and to focus and hone in on what breaks His heart and take ground in His name. Church, let's pray together this morning that we would be a church that gets beyond these four walls, that carries the heart that Jesus carried and makes a difference for those that are oppressed and captive. Would you pray with me over this? Heavenly Father, we come before you this morning with our hearts broken. That as we recognize the reality of where our world is right now, God, we want to be a church that chases after your heart, that chases after those that are oppressed or captive, that we would show them the worth and the value that they have in you. God, let us start today fighting for that, pursuing that, becoming aware of that, because we want to be a church that changes this world on your behalf. God, we pray this all in your Son's precious name.